I'm Elena, 32 years old, and I'm the head waitress at an upscale restaurant in Boston. My husband James and I have been married for 5 years now, and his mother Catherine never approved of me. I never thought she would show up at my workplace to humiliate me in front of my colleagues and customers. What happened next shocked everyone, especially Catherine, when her face turned pale with embarrassment. Let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to hear how I stood up to my mother-in-law. I grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood in South Boston where most families worked in factories or service jobs. My father was a mechanic and my mother cleaned houses for wealthy families. They worked incredibly hard to provide for me and my 2 younger siblings. We never had much, but they taught me the value of hard work and perseverance. When I turned 18, I needed to find a job to help pay for community college. The only position I could get was as a dishwasher at a small family restaurant downtown. The hours were long, the pay was minimal, and I would return home with my hands wrinkled and smelling like industrial soap. But I never complained because I saw how my parents had sacrificed for years without a word. Within 6 months, I had moved up to bussing tables, then to serving. I discovered I had a natural talent for remembering orders, anticipating customer needs, and remaining calm during the chaotic dinner rushes. The restaurant manager noticed my work ethic and started giving me more responsibilities. For 8 years, I worked at various restaurants, each one a step up from the last. I took courses in hospitality management whenever I could afford them. By the time I was 26, I had secured a position as head waitress at the Harbor View, one of the most prestigious seafood restaurants in Boston. Located right on the waterfront with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor, it attracted wealthy clients, business executives, and the occasional celebrity. I still remember the night I met James. It was a Tuesday evening in April, typically a slower night, but we had a private event in one section of the restaurant. James came in with 3 business associates, all wearing expensive suits and exuding confidence. While the others were somewhat demanding, James was polite, making eye contact when he spoke to me and actually saying thank you. When his colleagues left for a moment, James asked me about myself, showing genuine interest in my answers. I learned he was a financial analyst at a prestigious firm downtown. When the bill came, he left a generous tip and his business card with a note asking if I would like to get coffee sometime. Our first date was nothing fancy, just coffee at a small cafe near the harbor. I was nervous about my clothes, afraid they would look cheap compared to what he was used to. But James never seemed to notice or care about such things. He was interested in my stories, my ambitions, my perspective on life. The differences in our backgrounds became more apparent as we continued dating. James had grown up in Beacon Hill, one of Boston's wealthiest neighborhoods. He had attended private schools, then Harvard, for both his undergraduate and MBA degrees. His father, Thomas, was a retired surgeon, and his mother, Catherine, was heavily involved in Boston's social scene and charity circuit. The first time I met Catherine at their Beacon Hill townhouse, I knew I was being evaluated. Her smile never reached her eyes as she looked me up and down. She asked probing questions about my family, my education, and my career, each answer seeming to confirm some negative assumption she had already made. A waitress. How interesting, she had said with a tight smile. I assume that's temporary while you figure out your real career path. When I explained that I actually enjoyed the restaurant industry and hoped to become a manager or even own my establishment someday, she merely nodded and changed the subject. The message was clear, I wasn't good enough for her son. Despite Catherine's obvious disapproval, James proposed 6 months later. He did it at the Harbor View after hours with the help of my boss, who allowed him to set up a private dinner by the window overlooking the moonlit harbor. It was perfect, intimate, and completely us. Catherine pushed for a large, elaborate wedding at the country club where the family had been members for generations. She had a list of 300 guests, most of whom neither James nor I had ever met. We pushed back, opting instead for a smaller ceremony at a waterfront park, followed by a reception at, fittingly enough, the Harbor View. Catherine barely concealed her disappointment, making comments about how we were missing an opportunity to properly introduce Elena to society. After we married, I continued working at the Harbor View. I loved my job, the regular customers who asked for me by name, and the respect I had earned from the staff. The owner, Richard, even hinted that he was considering me for an assistant manager position in the future. James supported my career, never suggesting that I should quit now that we were married. We had a comfortable apartment in South End, not as affluent as Beacon Hill, but still a nice area. We were building a life that made us both happy, blending parts of both our worlds. My co-workers became like a second family. Marco, our head chef, was a boisterous Italian-American who treated everyone in the restaurant like his children, alternating between shouting orders during rush hour and doling out relationship advice during prep time. Tanya, a college student who worked as my assistant waitress on busy nights, looked up to me as a mentor. Even Gerald, our curmudgeonly bartender with 20 years of experience, showed his approval through gruff nods and the occasional free drink at the end of a difficult shift. Life felt good. James and I were happy. I was excelling at my job. The only dark cloud was Catherine and her constant subtle undermining of our relationship and my worth. Little did I know that cloud was about to turn into a full-blown storm. Catherine Winchester was Boston aristocracy, descended from a family that had arrived on the Mayflower. The Winchesters had been influential in Boston politics, academia, and philanthropy for generations. Their name appeared on buildings at Harvard, on donor walls, at Massachusetts General Hospital, and in the society pages of Boston's newspapers. Catherine herself had never worked a day in her life. She had attended Radcliffe College, where she met Thomas, and her only occupation since had been managing their household and her extensive social obligations. Her calendar was filled with charity luncheons, museum board meetings, and garden club events. From the moment James introduced me as his girlfriend, Catherine had begun a campaign of subtle degradation. It was never anything obvious enough that I could point to and say, that was rude. Instead, it was death by 1,000 cuts each interaction, leaving me feeling slightly less worthy. Eleanor, dear, you look tired. The service industry must be so demanding on the body, she would say at family dinners with a concerned expression that didn't match the gleam in her eyes. Or when discussing James's childhood, James was always reading. Our nanny could barely keep enough books in the house for him. I suppose that's why he's always been attracted to people with interesting stories. The implication being that my only value was as a novelty, someone with tales from the other side of the tracks. James existed in a state of perpetual conflict. When I would bring up his mother's behaviour, he would sigh and say things like, "That's just how she is," or "she doesn't mean anything by it." Years of conditioning had taught him that keeping the peace with Catherine was easier than confronting her. Family gatherings became exercises in endurance. There was the Thanksgiving dinner where Catherine had placed me at the far end of the table, away from James, claiming it was traditional seating. The Christmas where she gave everyone monogrammed cashmere sweaters except me, who received a generic scarf from a department store with the gift receipt conspicuously included. The Easter brunch where she accidentally spilled red wine on my white dress, then insisted I borrow one of her outfits that was 2 sizes too large. I tried everything to win her approval. I brought thoughtful gifts, offered to help with her charity events, expressed interest in her family history. Nothing worked. To Catherine, I would always be the waitress who had somehow tricked her son into marriage. The situation grew more complicated when I discovered that Catherine had become friends with Sophia, the wife of Richard, the Harborview's owner. They had met at a charity auction and bonded over their shared interest in local historical preservation. Now Catherine had a connection to my workplace, something that filled me with anxiety. At a Winchester family reunion, I overheard Catherine talking to James's cousin Amanda. "James is going through a phase," she said, unaware I was around the corner. "He'll come to his senses eventually. The novelty of marrying the help will wear off and he'll realize he needs someone from our world. Thomas and I are just waiting it out." When I confronted James about this comment, his response was tepid at best. "My mother says outrageous things sometimes. You can't take it personally," he said, not meeting my eyes. It was the first time I wondered if James would ever truly stand up for me, or if I would forever be fighting this battle alone. Then came the Harborview charity event that would change everything. The restaurant was hosting a fundraiser for a local children's hospital with tickets costing $500 per person. The guest list included Boston's elite hospital board members and several minor celebrities. As head waitress, I was responsible for ensuring everything ran smoothly in the dining room. I had no idea that Catherine had purchased tickets or that she was about to turn what should have been a showcase of my professional abilities into a public humiliation. The Harborview was transformed for the charity event. Crystal chandeliers had been brought in to supplement the usual lighting. The tables were adorned with blue and silver decorations, the colours of the children's hospital. A small stage had been set up for the speeches and auction that would take place after dinner. I had arrived 4 hours early to oversee the preparations. My hair was pulled back in a neat bun, my black dress uniform pressed to perfection, my comfortable yet professional shoes polished. I had briefed the waitstaff on the VIPs attending and the special dietary requirements of certain guests. Remember, Table 7 has the hospital director who is allergic to shellfish. Table 12 has the mayor and his wife. She prefers vegetarian options. Table 15 has the Jacobs family who donated the new pediatric wing. They always want extra bread. I instructed as we prepared for doors to open. The event began smoothly. Guests arrived in evening wear, the bar was busy but not overwhelmed, and the kitchen was executing dishes perfectly under Marco's supervision. I was in constant motion, checking on tables, coordinating with the sommelier, and ensuring the timing aligned with the program for the evening. It was during the first course that I spotted her. Catherine was seated at table 9, directly in the centre of my section. She was wearing a navy blue gown with a diamond necklace that probably cost more than my annual salary. Around her were 5 other women of similar age and status, all members of her garden club. My stomach dropped. Catherine had never once visited the Harbour View during the 3 years I had worked there. There was no way her presence tonight was a coincidence. I approached the table with professional courtesy. "Good evening, ladies. Welcome to the Harbour View. I'm Eleanor, and I'll be overseeing your service tonight." Catherine looked up with exaggerated surprise. "Eleanor? My goodness, what a coincidence, ladies. This is James's wife I was telling you about. The way she emphasized wife made it sound like a temporary condition. Her friends all smiled politely, but I could see the curiosity in their eyes. I had become the evening's entertainment. "How lovely to see you, Catherine. I hope you enjoy your evening," I said, maintaining my composure. "Our special tonight is the seared scallops with truffle risotto. I'll send your server right over to take your drink orders." As I walked away, I heard Catherine stage whisper, "She insists on keeping this job. I've told James it's hardly appropriate for a Winchester wife to be serving others, but she seems to enjoy it." Laughter followed. I assigned Tanya to be their primary server, but Catherine kept finding reasons to summon me to the table. The wine was too warm, the bread wasn't fresh enough, the lighting was too dim. With each complaint, her voice grew louder, drawing attention from nearby tables. During the main course, I was checking on a table nearby when I overheard Catherine holding court with her friends. "James married beneath him, of course," she said, swirling her wine. "His father and I have accepted it as a phase. Young men sometimes need to rebel before settling down properly. The physical attraction will fade, and then he'll realize he needs a partner who understands our world." My cheeks burned with humiliation as I pretended not to hear. Marco, who was making rounds to check on guests' satisfaction with the food, caught my eye from across the room. He could tell something was wrong. When we passed each other near the kitchen, he squeezed my shoulder in solidarity. "Everything okay, Eleanor? You look upset," he whispered. "It's fine, just a difficult table," I replied, not wanting to bring my personal drama into the workplace. The situation escalated during dessert. Catherine was now visibly intoxicated, having consumed most of a bottle of expensive Chardonnay. She beckoned me over with an imperious wave. "Eleanor dear, this chocolate soufflé is completely fallen. I expected better from a restaurant of this caliber," she announced loudly. I examined the dessert, which looked perfectly executed to me. "I'm sorry it's not to your liking, Catherine. I'd be happy to bring you something else." She made a dismissive gesture that caused her to knock over her water glass. The water spilled across the table and onto the lap of one of her friends. In the ensuing commotion, Catherine somehow managed to imply it was my fault. "If the waitstaff were paying proper attention, this wouldn't have happened," she declared, as her friend dabbed at her wet dress with a napkin. Tanya, who was helping clean up the spill, gave me a look of disbelief. Even she, a 20-year-old college student, could see the unfairness of the situation. As I headed to the kitchen to get more napkins, Richard, the owner, intercepted me. "Is everything all right? Eleanor table 9 seems to be causing quite a disturbance," he said with concern. "I'm handling it, Richard. Just a small spill." I assured him, not wanting to admit that my mother-in-law was deliberately trying to make me look bad in front of my boss. "If you need a break or want someone else to take over that section, just say the word," he offered. I shook my head. "Thank you, but I can manage." But as the evening progressed, I wasn't sure how much more I could take. I was on the verge of tears, fighting to maintain my professional demeanor, while being systematically humiliated by someone who was supposed to be family. Catherine was now openly criticizing every aspect of the service, her voice carrying across the restaurant. The elegant atmosphere of the charity event was being disrupted by her behavior. "Excuse me, waitress," she called out, snapping her fingers as if I were a dog. I was helping another table, but she continued until I had no choice but to respond. "Yes, Catherine." "How can I help?" I asked, maintaining my professional smile despite the condescending treatment. The service here has become absolutely atrocious, she announced to her entire table. In my day, waitstaff knew their place and performed their duties invisibly. Now they think they're part of the social experience. Her friends looked uncomfortable, but none spoke up to contradict her. I apologize if the service isn't meeting your expectations, I said evenly. Is there something specific I can address for you? Catherine looked me up and down with disdain. Your hair is coming loose from that bun. It looks sloppy and unprofessional. And your posture. Slouching like that in front of customers, no wonder James is embarrassed to bring his work colleagues to meet you. The comment stung because it touched on an insecurity. James had been reluctant to invite his co-workers over for dinner, claiming our apartment was too small. I had wondered if he was actually embarrassed by me. I'll fix my hair right away, I said, retreating to the restroom where I could have a moment alone. In the mirror, I saw that my hair was perfectly fine. The accusation had been yet another tactic to undermine me. When I returned, Catherine was sending her nearly finished steak back to the kitchen, claiming it was overcooked when she had specifically requested medium rare. I took the plate knowing full well she had ordered it medium well. In the kitchen, Marco examined the steak and confirmed it was cooked exactly as she had requested. What's going on out there? He asked. That table has sent back 3 perfectly good dishes. I shook my head, unable to explain without breaking down. Marco, sensing my distress, prepared a new steak anyway, adding a special garnish to make it look different. Back at the table, Catherine had moved on to critiquing my appearance to her friends. It's the hands that give away a woman's real status, she was saying. No amount of manicures can hide the damage done by years of manual labor. I set the new steak in front of her, pretending not to have heard. As I turned to leave, she grabbed my wrist, her manicured nails digging into my skin. Eleanor, be a dear and tell these ladies how you met my son. Was it at this restaurant? Were you his waitress? It's such a Cinderella story. The way she said it made it sound tawdry, as if I had somehow trapped or tricked James. Yes, we met here, I answered simply, trying to extract my wrist from her grip. And now you're a Winchester. Isn't America wonderful? Anyone can marry up if they're pretty enough. That comment drew shocked looks from even her friends. One of them, a silver-haired woman in a conservative black dress, actually murmured, Catherine, that's enough. Okay, Sam. But Catherine was on a roll. She began bringing up personal information, things James must have told his parents in confidence. Eleanor was raised in such humble circumstances. Her father fixed cars, can you imagine? And her mother was actually a domestic. They lived in one of those triple-deckers in Southie, so de classe. I felt exposed, my family background being mocked for the entertainment of these wealthy strangers. I wanted to defend my parents, to explain that they were good, hard-working people who had given me strong values. But I remained silent, professional constraints, keeping me from engaging in a personal argument during a charity event. Catherine escalated further, moving from passive-aggressive comments to active sabotage of my professional reputation. You know, she said loudly as I served coffee to a nearby table, I've noticed the prices here are quite high for what you get. I wonder where all that money goes. Certainly not to better ingredients. Guests at nearby tables were beginning to stare. The insinuation that the Harbour View was overcharging customers was potentially damaging to the restaurant's reputation. I texted James from the service station, Your mother is at my restaurant publicly humiliating me. Please help. His response came 5 minutes later. At work, can't talk. What do you mean, asikis? I didn't have time to explain further, as Catherine was now demanding to speak to a real manager about the substandard service. The final straw came when she loudly suggested that perhaps inventory shrinkage at the restaurant might be connected to staff with questionable backgrounds who were living beyond their means. The implication that I might be stealing from my workplace was clear to everyone within earshot. At that moment, I felt something inside me break. Not my spirit, but rather the chains of politeness and deference that had kept me bound to Catherine's abuse. I had endured years of subtle digs, backhanded compliments, and social undermining. But attacking my professional integrity in my workplace, in front of my colleagues and customers, was beyond what anyone should be expected to tolerate. My hands were shaking as I excused myself and walked to the kitchen. I could feel the eyes of customers on my back, wondering if the wealthy woman's accusations had merit. Years of hard work and integrity were being questioned because of one vindictive woman's classist prejudice. As I pushed through the kitchen doors, the tears I had been holding back finally spilled over. In the relative privacy of the kitchen, I leaned against a stainless steel prep table, trying to regain my composure. Marco immediately noticed my state and rushed over, concern etched on his face. "Elena, what's happening? You're crying," he said, handing me a clean kitchen towel. "That woman at table 9 is my mother-in-law," I explained, wiping my tears carefully to avoid smearing my makeup. "She's deliberately trying to humiliate me and damage my reputation here." Marco's expression darkened. He had met James several times at staff gatherings and had always been protective of me in a fatherly way. "That's completely unacceptable," he said firmly. "You should not have to endure abuse from anyone, family or not. Do you want me to speak with Richard?" Tanya had come into the kitchen to place an order and overheard our conversation. She approached with surprising fierceness for someone so young. "That woman is horrible, Eleanor," she said. "I heard what she said about you stealing. Everyone can tell she's just being nasty. No one believes her." Their support meant everything to me in that moment. For years, I had been fighting this battle alone, with even James providing only lukewarm defense. Now my work family was rallying around me. But I faced a difficult decision. The professional response would be to continue serving Catherine's table with a smile, maintaining the high standards. The Harbourview was known for regardless of personal feelings. That's what I had been taught throughout my career in service. Yet as I stood there, a deeper truth emerged. Being professional didn't mean being a doormat. It didn't mean allowing someone to attack my character, my background, and my integrity without consequence. True professionalism meant having enough self-respect to establish boundaries, even with difficult customers. "I need to address this," I said, finally straightening my posture. "Not just for myself, but for everyone who's ever been looked down on because of their job or background." Marco nodded approvingly. "Just remember, we have your back. And so will Richard. He values you far more than any single customer, no matter how wealthy." I took a deep breath, checked my appearance in the reflection of a polished pot, and smoothed down my uniform. Then I walked back into the dining room with a newfound resolve. The room seemed to quiet as I approached Catherine's table. Perhaps it was my imagination, or perhaps the other guests had sensed the building tension throughout the evening. I stood at the head of table 9, my posture straight, my voice clear but not confrontational. All 6 women looked up at me, Catherine with an expression of smug expectation, as if waiting for me to grovel over some perceived failing. "Catherine," I began, using her name rather than the usual ma'am or Mrs. Winchester, to establish our actual relationship. "I need to address what's been happening this evening." "Finally," Catherine interrupted with a dismissive wave. I was beginning to think management here was completely indifferent to customer complaints. I held up a hand, a gesture I had never used with a customer before. "Please allow me to finish. First, I want to clarify something for your friends who may not be aware. I am Elena Winchester, James's wife, and your daughter-in-law." A murmur went around the table. Clearly, Catherine had not been fully honest about who she was targeting with her behaviour. "For 3 years, I have tried to build a relationship with you, despite your constant attempts to undermine me. I've endured your comments about my background, my job, and my worth as a person. I've watched you try to exclude me from family events and photographs. I've heard you tell people that James will come to his senses eventually." Catherine's face was beginning to redden, whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. "I have maintained my dignity throughout all of that because I loved James and wanted peace in our family. But what you've done tonight crosses a line that no one should cross. You have come to my workplace, my professional environment, where I have earned respect through years of hard work and deliberately attempted to humiliate me and damage my reputation." The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even the clink of silverware had stopped as people realized they were witnessing an extraordinary confrontation. "I want you to know that I am proud of my job. I am proud of working my way up from dishwasher to head waitress through dedication and skill. I am proud of my working-class parents, who taught me values that clearly not everyone in wealthy circles has learnt: respect for others, regardless of their position, the dignity of honest work, and basic human decency." Catherine attempted to interject, but I continued, my voice steady. "Service work is not beneath anyone. The people who serve your food, clean your houses, and fix your cars are not lesser human beings. We deserve the same respect you would give to a doctor, lawyer, or CEO." I noticed Richard, the restaurant owner, had appeared near the bar, watching intently. Rather than looking concerned about the scene, he seemed to be listening with approval. "Catherine, you have 2 choices right now. You can either apologize for your behavior this evening and finish your meal respectfully, or you can leave. But what you cannot do is continue to treat me or any member of the staff with the contempt you've shown tonight." Catherine's face had gone from red to ashen. She clearly had never expected me to stand up to her so publicly and articulately. She glanced around at her friends seeking alliance, but found only uncomfortable expressions and averted eyes. "This is outrageous," she sputtered. "I'll speak to Richard about this immediately. You'll be lucky to have a job tomorrow." As if on cue, Richard approached the table. Catherine looked triumphant, clearly expecting him to discipline me. Instead, he placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "Is there a problem here, Eleanor?" he asked, making it clear where his loyalty lay. Mrs. Winchester was just deciding whether she wanted to stay and enjoy the remainder of the charity event respectfully, or if she would prefer to leave. I explained calmly. Catherine's face now drained of all colour, taking on the pale, shocked expression of someone who has just had their worldview shattered. She had assumed her social status would shield her from consequences, that Richard would naturally side with a wealthy patron over a staff member. She had been wrong. "I think perhaps we should go," one of her friends suggested gently. "It's getting late." With as much dignity as she could muster, Catherine gathered her purse and stood. "This is not the end of this discussion," she said, but the threat sounded hollow even to her own ears. As the group departed, I noticed several tables around the restaurant giving me subtle nods of approval or quietly applauding. One older gentleman, a regular customer who always requested my section, actually stood and offered me a small bow of respect. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation began to subside, leaving me shaky but proud. I had finally stood up for myself and for everyone who had ever been made to feel small by someone who confused wealth with worth. The remainder of the charity event passed in something of a blur. I continued my duties, checking on tables, ensuring wine glasses were filled, and coordinating with the kitchen. Outwardly, I maintained my professional demeanour, but inside my emotions oscillated between pride, anxiety, and lingering anger. As the last guests departed around midnight, the staff gathered for our usual post-event debrief. Richard addressed the elephant in the room immediately. "Elena," he said in front of everyone, "I want you to know that you handled an extraordinarily difficult situation with grace and professionalism tonight. That woman's behaviour was completely unacceptable, and you had every right to stand up for yourself." His public support brought tears to my eyes. After years of having my concerns about Catherine dismissed or minimised by James, having someone validate my experience felt like a weight lifting from my shoulders. Marco raised his water glass in a toast. "To Eleanor, who showed us all what real class looks like." The staff erupted in applause and supportive comments. Tanya hugged me, whispering, "You were amazing. I'll never forget what you did." Even Gerald, the bartender, who rarely showed emotion, nodded approvingly. "'Bout time someone told that woman what's what," he muttered. "Been watching her type look down their noses at service folks my whole career." As we cleaned and reset the restaurant for the next day, my phone buzzed with text messages from James. "Just got out of meeting. What happened with my mother? She's called me 6 times hysterical. Coming home now. We need to talk." My stomach tightened. Despite the support from my colleagues, I still faced the challenge of explaining everything to James. Would he finally stand up to his mother, or would he once again try to minimize her behavior and encourage me to keep the peace? The drive home was tense. I rehearsed what I would say, trying to find words that would make James understand the depth of the hurt and humiliation I had endured, not just tonight, but for years. I pulled into our apartment building's parking lot at 1:30 a.m., exhausted, physically and emotionally. James was waiting up, pacing our living room in the rumpled suit he had worn to work that morning. His face was a mixture of confusion and concern. "What happened?" he asked as soon as I walked through the door. "My mother says you publicly humiliated her at the restaurant. She's threatening to cut me off financially." My heart sank at his opening words. "No, are you okay?" No recognition that I might have been the victim rather than the aggressor. "Your mother showed up at my workplace with the deliberate intention of humiliating me," I said, too tired to soften the truth. She spent the entire evening making degrading comments about my background, my job, and even implied I might be stealing from the restaurant. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he made when stressed. "She can be thoughtless sometimes, I know, but publicly confronting her, you know how she is about appearances." Something inside me snapped at his response. 5 years of being patient, of accepting his weak defenses, of his mother's behaviour, of being told that's just how she is, as if it excused everything. "No, James, stop, just stop," I said, my voice rising despite my exhaustion. "What your mother did tonight wasn't thoughtless. It was cruel, deliberate, and calculated to hurt me and damage my professional reputation. And I am done, absolutely done, with you minimizing her behavior. James looked taken aback by my vehemence. In our 5 years together, I had always been the peacekeeper, the one who bent to keep everyone happy. If you had been there, I continued, if you had heard the things she said, seen how she treated me like I was beneath her, you would understand. Or at least I hope you would. Because if you can defend what she did tonight, then I don't know who you are anymore. To my surprise, instead of becoming defensive, James seemed to deflate. He sank onto our sofa, looking suddenly exhausted and much older than his 34 years. You're right, he said quietly. You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. I waited, unsure if this was the beginning of a real change or just another temporary acknowledgement that would fade by morning. I've been enabling her behavior for years, James continued. Not just with you, but with everyone. Growing up, it was easier to go along with whatever she wanted than to face her disapproval. My father did the same. We all just worked around her moods and prejudices. He looked up at me, genuine remorse in his eyes. But that stops now. What she did to you is inexcusable. I should have been there tonight. I should have been standing beside you. For the first time since I'd known him, James seemed to truly understand the impact his mother had on our lives. We talked until dawn, having the kind of honest conversation we should have had years ago. He admitted feeling trapped between his love for me and his lifelong pattern of appeasing his mother. I shared how isolated and undermined I had felt, constantly fighting a battle without his full support. As the sun began to rise, my phone rang. It was Richard, calling at an unusually early hour. Eleanor, I hope I didn't wake you, he said when I answered. No, I'm up, I assured him. I wanted to let you know that I've received several calls already this morning, including one from Catherine Winchester, threatening legal action and demanding your termination. My heart sank, but before I could respond, Richard continued. I also received calls from 3 different guests who attended last night, all specifically commending your professionalism and expressing their support for how you handled the situation. One of them, Mrs. Abernathy from the hospital board, said it was the most dignified response to inexcusable behaviour she had ever witnessed. Relief flooded through me. Thank you for telling me, Richard. Furthermore, he added, I want to formalise something I've been considering for a while. I'd like to promote you to assistant manager effective immediately. Your handling of last night's situation only confirmed what I already knew about your character and leadership abilities. When I hung up, I was crying again, but this time from relief and validation. James, who had been watching my side of the conversation with concern, pulled me into a hug when I told him the news. I'm so proud of you, he said, and I promise things are going to be different from now on. Over the next few days, we experienced both challenges and unexpected support. Catherine had indeed begun calling family members, trying to turn them against me with a distorted version of events. But her efforts largely backfired. Several of James's relatives called to express their support, many admitting they had witnessed Catherine's poor treatment of me at family gatherings, but had been too conflict-averse to speak up. More surprising was the appearance of regular customers at the Harbour View, specifically requesting my section and expressing their support. Word had spread through Boston's social circles about what had happened, and many people seemed to appreciate someone finally standing up to Catherine Winchester's notorious behaviour. The most unexpected visit came 3 days after the incident, when James's father, Thomas, appeared at the restaurant during my lunch shift. I'd like a table in Elena's section. I overheard him requesting from the host stand. Thomas and I had always had a cordial but distant relationship. Unlike Catherine, he had never been openly disapproving, but neither had he been particularly warm or supportive. Hello, Elena, he said when I approached his table. I hope you don't mind me dropping by your workplace. Not at all, I assured him, though I felt apprehensive about his intentions. I came to apologise, he said, surprising me completely. Not just for Catherine's behaviour the other night, which was reprehensible, but for my own silence over the years. Thomas explained that he and Catherine had been effectively separated for the past 3 years, though they maintained appearances for social reasons. He lived primarily at their Cape Cod house, only returning to Boston for obligations or family events. Catherine's behaviour has driven away many people over the years, he confided. Friends, family members, household staff. I made the mistake of accommodating her rather than confronting the issue. It's a pattern I see James falling into as well, and it concerns me. His honesty was unexpected and touching. Before leaving, he handed me his card with his personal cell number written on the back. "I want you to know you have an ally in the family," he said. "James is lucky to have found someone with both strength and dignity." The weeks that followed tested James and me in ways we hadn't anticipated. Catherine's financial threats proved real, with James discovering his access to certain family accounts had been restricted. We had always lived primarily on our own incomes, but the reality of being truly cut off from Winchester family resources was still an adjustment. More difficult was the emotional strain. James had to redefine his relationship with his mother for the first time in his life, setting clear boundaries and standing firm when she tested them. There were arguments, tears, and periods of tense silence. Catherine tried every manipulation tactic she knew, from guilt to threats to playing the victim. But something fundamental had changed in James. Seeing me stand up to his mother had awakened his own courage. For the first time, he was defining himself not as Catherine's son, but as his own man, with values and priorities that didn't align with hers. The turning point came when James called a family meeting with both his parents present. I offered to stay away to make things easier, but he insisted I should be there. "You're my family now," he said, "my primary family, and it's time everyone understood that." In that meeting, James calmly but firmly laid out new boundaries. He would no longer tolerate any disrespect toward me. Catherine could either accept our marriage and treat me with courtesy, or she would see very little of her son going forward. Catherine predictably did not take this well. She threatened to write James out of her will, to withdraw financial support for any future grandchildren's education, to remove him from boards and social clubs where Winchester influence held sway. To my amazement and pride, James remained unmoved. "If that's your choice, I accept it," he said simply, "but it won't change my position." Thomas, breaking his usual pattern of non-intervention, actually spoke up in our support. "Catherine, you're making a grave mistake. One that will cost you your relationship with your son. Is that really what you want your legacy to be?" As we left that difficult meeting, I felt a new bond forming between James and me. We had faced a significant challenge together and emerged stronger, more united in our priorities and values. Meanwhile, my professional life was flourishing. The promotion to assistant manager came with new responsibilities that I embraced enthusiastically. Richard began involving me in more business decisions, from menu planning to staff hiring, clearly grooming me for further advancement. I found myself mentoring newer staff members, particularly those from backgrounds similar to mine, who faced prejudice or condescension from certain customers. I shared my experience of standing up to Catherine as an example of maintaining dignity without compromising professionalism. The confidence I gained from that confrontation spilled into other areas of my life. I enrolled in a business management course at a local college. I reconnected with friends from my old neighbourhood whom I had somewhat neglected as I tried to fit into James's world. I stopped apologising for my background and started embracing it as a source of strength and perspective. 6 months after the confrontation at the Harbour View, James and I were sitting on our small balcony enjoying the first truly warm evening of spring. We had opened a bottle of wine to celebrate my official promotion to full restaurant manager, a position Richard had created specifically for me. "I'm so proud of you," James said, raising his glass in a toast. "You've accomplished this entirely on your own merit." I smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. For years, I had harbored a small secret fear that my success might be due to my connection to the Winchester name. The events of the past 6 months had proven conclusively that my achievements were my own. Our relationship had transformed in ways I hadn't thought possible. James was no longer caught between two worlds trying to please everyone. He had firmly chosen our partnership above all else, and that choice had freed him to be more authentic and direct in all his relationships. Our contact with Catherine had been limited and conditional. After 2 months of estrangement, she had reached out through Thomas to indicate a willingness to try again under our terms. Our first dinner together had been tense but civil. Catherine had actually made a small effort asking about my work, without the usual condescension in her tone. "I think she's finally realised you're not going anywhere," James had observed afterward, "and more importantly, that I'm not going to abandon you to keep her happy." The financial threats had largely proven empty. While Catherine had removed James from some minor family accounts, Thomas had quietly ensured we weren't truly cut off. Not that it mattered much anymore, with both our careers advancing steadily. One unexpected benefit of the confrontation had been the acceleration of my professional goals. With Richard's mentorship, I was developing a business plan for my own restaurant, a dream that had once seemed distant and perhaps unattainable. "I'm thinking of a place that bridges both our worlds," I explained to James as we discussed the concept. Upscale enough for fine dining, but welcoming to everyone. No pretension, just excellent food and service that makes all guests feel valued. James, who had developed a genuine appreciation for the restaurant industry through our relationship, offered thoughtful suggestions and practical support. He had introduced me to a former business school classmate who specialized in restaurant financing, opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed to me. Our strengthened partnership extended beyond career support. We had both learnt valuable lessons about communication boundaries and the importance of presenting a united front to the world. Issues that had once caused tension now became opportunities for deeper connection and understanding. I had also reconnected more deeply with my own family. For too long, I had kept them somewhat separate from my life, with James unconsciously absorbing Catherine's message that they weren't quite good enough for the Winchester world. Now my parents were regular guests in our home, and James had developed a genuine friendship with my father, who was teaching him basic car maintenance, much to both their delight. The most profound change, however, was in how I viewed myself. I no longer saw myself through Catherine's critical eyes or worried about measuring up to some arbitrary social standard. The woman who had stood up at table 9 that night had claimed her own worth defined on her own terms. 3 weeks after my promotion, I had an unexpected encounter with Catherine. I was shopping downtown when I spotted her emerging from a boutique. For a moment, I considered ducking into a store to avoid an awkward interaction, but instead I straightened my shoulders and approached her directly. "Hello, Catherine," I said pleasantly, but without the excessive deference I might once have shown. She seemed startled to see me, but nodded politely. "Eleanor, congratulations on your promotion. James mentioned it." "Thank you," I replied, noting with surprise that she had actually acknowledged my professional achievement. We stood in awkward silence for a moment before Catherine spoke again. "I'm hosting a garden party next month for the Historical Society. You and James should come if you're available." It wasn't an apology, and I didn't expect one. Catherine was not the type of person who admitted wrongdoing easily, if ever. But it was an olive branch of sorts, an acknowledgement that I was part of her son's life permanently, and therefore part of hers. "We'll check our calendar," I said, maintaining my boundaries while accepting the gesture for what it was. As I walked away, I realized something profound: Catherine no longer had power over me. I could interact with her without anxiety, anger, or a desperate need for approval. I could accept whatever relationship was possible between us, without it defining my self-worth or happiness. That freedom was the greatest gift I had given myself by standing up that night at the Harbour View. Not just freedom from Catherine's judgment, but freedom from all the external voices that had told me I wasn't enough, that I didn't belong, that I should be grateful for acceptance, rather than expecting respect as my due. The journey hadn't been easy. There had been painful conversations, difficult decisions, and moments of doubt. But on the other side was a life more authentic and fulfilling than I could have imagined. A partnership based on mutual respect and support. A career built on genuine talent and determination. Relationships, both personal and professional, founded on honesty rather than appearance. I had learned that respect isn't something you earn by enduring mistreatment or compromising your dignity. Sometimes respect comes from having the courage to say, "enough," and stand firm in your own worth regardless of the consequences. For anyone out there facing their own, Catherine, remember that you deserve respect simply because you're human. Your worth isn't determined by your job title, your family background, or your social connections. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand tall and speak your truth. Have you ever had to stand up to someone who looked down on you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if you found my experience helpful, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that they deserve respect too. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, true dignity comes from within, not from anyone else's approval.